What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Heck versus Hell, where the truth we tell. Welcome to all you lovely listeners, new and veteran, I guess. I don't want to say old, right? Veteran listeners, OGs, triple OGs. Welcome back to another episode, and welcome wherever it is that you were listening to this in the world at any times. I'm hoping you're listening to this actually years later, whenever I'm an old man, a very old man. Let's find out. You get to hear what I'm like as a not so old man, right? Anyway, sorry, I just went into a little bit of visualization there of seeing myself as a 60-year-old man, if God does allow me to make it to that age. However, we are back to another episode, and today's episode is going to be a little bit of a shorter one because it's not too crazy deep, but it is something that I want to talk about, especially when it comes to the point of consistently elevating your life. Okay, so, one of the biggest things, and we talk about this so much, whether it be on the RDDC, True Seekers Mastermind Alliance, or previous Heck versus Hell episodes, S&M, Spirit of Mind Elevation. And then that's what all of the Lex Effect coaching, shout out to Lex, gonna drop that bad to the bone coaching very soon. Um, and it's going to be all about spiritual elevation and enhancement of becoming who you were always created to be, which is really what we're out here to do, to spread that kind of message, to spread those kind of words. I saw all the love that was headed over to the Battle of the Soul. Thank you for all your encouragement, all your love, all your downloads, all your listens, all your streams, all your plays, everything under the sun, all the comments. I can't see every single comment because I don't even know most of these syndications that are there, okay? And that's not any shade. It is just generally a fact because hey, I'm a little ignorant, okay? That's just simplicity of it. But anyways, it's gonna be a shorter episode because I want it to be about, especially what we continue to talk about. But this one in particular, it's about the certain areas in our life where we have to heal from, where we have to change, right? And so many people, even when it comes to fake gurus, and I say fake gurus because they're not appointed and anointed by God, even though they have their points of truth, they still cannot unlock it or do it the same way, right? The replica is never going to be the same as the real thing, as the real deal Holyfield, as Lex loves to say. And it's basically going along the lines of you have to heal, you have to know what your belief system is in a certain area and why it came to be so. Okay, and we're also going to do another one. I probably should have done it first, but we're going to talk about how sin comes from trauma. Okay, and that one should have probably been first before this one, but let's do a little bit backwards because we do things different around here. So, what I want to talk about is that in specific is whenever you get to a point of healing, sometimes we don't, it's harder to find the further, deeper truths of where things came from, especially if you've gone through certain traumas where it took you to the point where you just allow yourself to forget. Your mind goes into a survival mode and it pushes those memories so far back that you cannot remember it. And there are those parts that are just maybe insignificant and you just can't fully acknowledge them all the way because you maybe already overlooked that area of healing, or you didn't correlate it directly to another portion of your life, whatever it may be, right? There's so many different things of where it could go. So basically what I'm trying to say is, and that's why this is titled the way it's titled, the battery life parable. And I say that in the context of when it comes to certain charging. Okay, for the most part, when it comes to different types of charging, and this is more known in cars. For example, if you have electric cars, if you drive electric cars, if you know how the charging process is of an electric car, usually it goes up to a certain percentage of charging, right? We'll say your battery is 80% charged, and at the end of it you get to, it feels like the last 20%, just for purposes of having this conversation. I can't give you the exact number, but the last 20% feels just as long as the first 80. Okay, and you can see that in different ways too when it comes to your battery life. Whenever your battery life drains in your phone, for example, that's more common. Most people have phones or laptops or whatever because you're listening to this right now, right? Any type of electronic device, usually it goes and it dies slower, or in that context, it charges slower, right? And I actually saw, I can't remember who it was. Someone had spoke about the charging concept of how it is, and they gave it the understanding of it being like a parking lot. So, whenever you're going, and let's say a parking lot is completely open and the battery, lithium ions, I believe is what they called it, they go and they can just zip into each parking lot, right? But as the parking lot gets fuller, it takes a much longer time to find that spot. So that's why usually when it comes to, right, that analogy of car batteries, when it comes to that point, you go to where it takes longer to charge. Now, you may be wondering, what the heck versus how does that have to do with what we're talking about, right? And I want to correlate it by saying it's the same way when it comes to trauma. It's much harder to find and pinpoint certain traumas that are so insignificant, and we can't seem to completely understand why it is that we believe certain things, right? No matter how much we're elevating, there can always be hidden block points that just don't allow you to get to that next level, right? And that's not to say, hey, just focus on the trauma, just focus on the healing process. It is a huge portion of what you need to do, and takes hold of so much of it. But you also need to focus on what your new belief system is going to be, what's going to take place of what you were trying to get rid of, and ultimately that goes and kind of diminishes the less important variables of certain conditionings. Okay. Now, that might be a little bit difficult to understand, but I can kind of visualize it in my head. So let me try to put it into words. In the same way, let's say you're going and filling, let's say you got a cup of water. All right. And there's certain things, and it just takes forever because there is a drip mechanism, we'll call it. There's a drip mechanism where the bottom of the cup is just dripping out, and you want it to drip out because you want to change that water and put in coffee, for example. Now, what you're going to do is you're just going to slowly wait for it to drip out, right? You're putting all the focus on it dripping out. You're just allowing it to drip and drip and drip, and that's all you're waiting on, and it gets you to a point of healing, right? We'll correlate that to the healing, right? As that water, that trauma comes out. I don't like correlating water to trauma all the way, but just bear with me. Go and you're just focusing on all of that. You have to wait until you are fully healed so you can replace it. But on the other side of that, to further the elevation process, you have to know what you're going to replace it with. So, in the meantime, while that's slowly starting to go and distill itself, you go and you start pouring coffee in there. And of course, it may be a little watered down, but for the most part, you're already starting the elevation process. There's certain areas in your life that have already changed. And ultimately, it's diluting the water, which coffee already contains a certain amount of water, right? But it's diluting that water to become coffee. So, in a way, it erases those more insignificant areas. So let's say, for example, you were talking about that water cup analogy. It would be much faster for you to just stop the dripping at, we'll say, 10% left and pour in the coffee. You really won't taste much of a difference because that coffee is going to overtake the water, if that makes sense. Okay, maybe that wasn't the best analogy, maybe that wasn't the best way to put it, but in the same way, we have to go and continuously build ourselves in that mannerism of making sure that we are focusing on both the healing process and the elevation process, right? And that's where it gets difficult, because there's certain traumas or certain insignificant conditionings that are so hidden, that are so out of the way, that you don't even realize is going on, and it's still somewhat causing a chink in your chain. It's not a full blocking point, but it's something that ultimately slows you down a little bit, right? And for these purposes, we'll call it the back seats of a race car. And as insignificant as it is, race cars will go and much rather get rid of that back seat to give them 0.04 seconds. Actually, that's a lot. We'll say 0.01 seconds in their 0 to 60 miles per hour. They'd rather get rid of that than keep it in there. So in the same way, it's insignificant, it doesn't make much of a change, but it does put you on a slightly higher trajectory and allows you to get to where you want to get at a faster pace, at a faster rate, right? And to give you a prime example, one of the things in my experience in my life that I had to come to terms about is I always, right? And I had a very close person of mine point this out to me, that I just can't be alone, apparently, right? And I always have to have some kind of brotherhood, some kind of male person in my life, and most of the time it would be like a brotherhood, like a friendship, something like that, in that mannerism. And it's like, well, why do you need that if you already have a woman in your life? And I couldn't answer. I'm like, well, it's just different. That's the woman in my life, but that's not the same. I can't go and do XYZ with them when I can. But in my mind, I just couldn't figure it out. So I was trying to understand it myself by saying that same thing. And I got to the point of understanding. Of course, it wasn't just going and seeking all these males or trying to be, but it was a resonance that I felt with these certain males. It was only certain males that I had in my life. And it was the same thing with previous men that I had in my life, the previous people I would hang out with and do battle with. And it was to the point of understanding that back then it was that trauma of always wanting someone to look up to, always wanting some kind of approval, always wanting some. But I knew I was at the point where that's no longer the case. And ultimately, I healed from that trauma, but it shifted in a way that wasn't detrimental, but it still caused the same pattern. So that's why, we want to target it and change it, right? And ultimately, I figured out, and this was just recently too, maybe like a week ago, I figured out that it was actually not anything in my trauma per se, but from my experience of understanding that these people are alone. These men are alone, and I'm able to glow in certain people's lives to the point where they feel like they can express themselves on a different level. They feel like they can, not to Lex's standard, of course. She goes and she'll have dudes telling her every crime they committed and crying to her and all that stuff. That's a whole different, but giving them that camaraderie. That's what I could do. I can give them that camaraderie that I know I never had, making them feel like, hey, you are special, you do belong. There is, there's someone here for you. You might have everybody else, but I got you. You see what I'm saying? And that's something that I never realized that I was doing subconsciously. I couldn't understand why it was happening. I'm like, well, it's just happening. I know it's not from anything wrong with me per se. Any trauma that I have, any past experience, but it's because I've been in that position and I knew what it felt like to put yourself out for everybody else, to go and be the helping hand for everybody else, to serve everybody else, and to say, hey, I'll take a bullet for you to everybody else when no one was willing to take one for me. And I understood what that felt like. So I wanted to give someone else that may have been in that position that opportunity to know, hey, there's someone that will take a bullet for me. Now, of course, that's in a human perspective because we already know there's someone that's willing to take the whole wrath of God for us, right? And that's a whole different feeling that just even right now is bringing me to tears just thinking about and talking about. Um, but it's certain little situations like that, and it's really important that even at the end of the day, make it a practice. Make it a practice to think, when did I go subconscious? And if you do go subconscious, where you just start going, taking the day, just going day by day, try to figure out why you are doing certain actions, how, no matter how minute it is, even if it comes from, okay, well, why do I fold this napkin a certain type of way? Or why am I spending so much time focusing on this? Because one of the most important things that we have to look at is our time. That's the most valuable resource that God has given us in this very blink of a moment. So analyze it. Analyze where it is that you're putting your currencies, time, energy, money. Analyze those situations so that you can further uncover it, right? Because it's the same way if we go and we say, all right, well, there's a million people in a room, and you have to figure out which one of them are good and which one of them are bad, and you can go and immediately right off the bat start locking people up. But as soon as you go and take away, we'll say 300,000 of them, it's going to get harder and harder to find. Maybe that's a better analogy than the coffee one. I don't know. But that's what I mean by it in that context, in that understanding. But we will go over, how trauma and sin correlate as well. But ultimately, yeah, it's very important to be able to look at those situations and start to understand them and analyze them and become better from them. Because ultimately, that's what we're here to do, is elevate and become what we were meant to be, and not in a cliche way, in a way of understanding that even though God is all being, all knowing, omnipotent, omniscience, omnipotent, everything under the sun still so fluid, in allowing Christ to come down and say, hey, you're my brother, you're my sister, we are related, you are a part of my family. And everything that Christ could do, we have the authority to do. But we have to get to a certain level of understanding. Now, of course, those gifts can be definitely unlocked sooner rather than later. They can be going and start being given to you at certain points in time. But ultimately, to perform the best and give the best God, we have to be at our peak state of mind, at our peak being and alignment, right? And that's why it's very crucial. So I love you all. I hope y'all have a blessed weekend, of course, or weekday, whatever it is that you're listening to this on. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for all the love and the support on behalf of all of us from the team. And we will catch you on the flip side.